The African sun was setting like a giant orange ball behind the acacia trees when David Carter first heard the sound that would change his life forever. He had been driving his old Jeep through the Masai Mara for 3 hours, documenting wildlife behavior for his research project, when a soft crying echoed across the golden grassland. David stopped his Jeep and turned off the engine. The sound came again, a weak, desperate whimper that tugged at his heart. He grabbed his camera and water bottle, stepping carefully into the tall grass. As a wildlife photographer who had spent 5 years in Africa, David knew the dangers of walking alone in lion territory, but something about that cry made him move forward anyway. David had come to Africa as a young man with dreams of adventure, but the continent had taught him much more than he expected. He had seen the beauty of untouched wilderness, but also the harsh reality of poaching, habitat loss, and human-wildlife conflict. Every day brought new challenges, but also moments of pure wonder that reminded him why he had chosen this difficult path. 20 meters from his Jeep, David found the source of the heartbreaking sound. A tiny lion cub, no bigger than a house cat, lay beside a fallen tree. Its golden fur was dirty and matted, and its small body shook with each weak cry. The cub couldn't have been more than 2 weeks old, its eyes barely open, clearly separated from its mother in pride. David's heart sank as he knelt down for a closer look. The cub's tiny ribs were visible through its fur, showing that it hadn't eaten in days. Its little paws were cut and bleeding from walking on rough ground, and its nose was dry and hot, signs of dehydration. David knew that lone cubs rarely survived in the wild. Without their mothers, they became easy prey for hyenas, leopards, or even other lions. But as he looked into the cub's bright amber eyes, David felt something he had never experienced before, a connection that went deeper than his scientific training. The little cub looked up at him and made a soft mewing sound, like it was asking for help. It tried to lift its head but was too weak, falling back onto the dusty ground with a tiny thud that broke David's heart. David knew he faced an impossible choice. Wildlife experts always said never to interfere with nature, but how could he walk away from this tiny, helpless creature? His training told him that interfering with wild animals could be dangerous and could disrupt natural processes, but every instinct in his body told him that this little life deserved a chance. If you're enjoying this incredible story of connection between human and wildlife, you'll love the amazing stories we share here. Don't forget to show your support. It helps us bring you more heartwarming tales like this one. David carefully picked up the cub, surprised by how light and fragile it felt in his hands. The little lion immediately snuggled against his chest, its crying stopping for the first time. David could feel the cub's tiny heartbeat against his palm, fast and desperate for life. The cub's fur was softer than he had imagined, and its small body was so warm and trusting in his arms. He carried the cub back to his Jeep, his mind racing with questions. Where was the pride? What had happened to the mother? Had she been killed by poachers or other predators? And most importantly, what should he do now? David had a satellite phone for emergencies, but the nearest wildlife rescue center was 8 hours away, and the cub looked too weak to survive such a long journey. As David placed the cub gently on the passenger seat, wrapping it in his spare shirt, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Fresh lion tracks in the mud near his Jeep. Big ones. A full-grown lion had been here recently, maybe watching him the entire time. The tracks were deep and clear, showing that a very large cat had walked around his vehicle while he was away. David's hands trembled as he started the engine. He knew he needed to get away from this area quickly, but as he began to drive, the cub started crying again, weaker than before. David realized the little one was probably hungry and dehydrated. He had some emergency milk powder in his supplies, but he would need to stop and prepare it. The smart thing would be to drive straight to the research camp 20 miles away, but David could see the cub was fading fast. Its breathing had become shallow and its small body felt cold even in the warm evening air. The cub's eyes were starting to close, and David feared that without immediate help, it might not survive the journey. David made a decision that his scientific training told him was wrong, but his heart knew was right. He stopped the Jeep in a small clearing surrounded by thorn bush, hoping the thick vegetation would provide some protection. The clearing was about 50 meters across with a small rocky outcrop on one side that could serve as a lookout point. David mixed the milk powder with bottled water, making sure the temperature was just right. He used a small syringe from his first aid kit to feed the cub drop by drop. The little lion's tongue was so tiny and pink, and watching it drink gave David hope. At first, the cub could barely swallow, but gradually it began to take more milk, its tiny stomach filling for the first time in days. For 20 minutes, David focused completely on feeding the cub, talking to it softly and stroking its fur. He told the cub about his research, about the beautiful animals he had photographed, about his life back home that seemed so far away now. The cub's strength seemed to return slightly, and it even tried to play with David's finger, grabbing it with its tiny claws. "You're going to be okay, little one," David whispered. "I promise I'll find a way to help you." The cub looked up at him with those bright amber eyes, and David felt like it understood every word. For a moment, David felt like maybe everything would be okay. The cub was drinking, its breathing was stronger, and its body temperature was returning to normal. David began to plan his route to the rescue center, thinking about which roads would be smoothest for the tiny passenger. That feeling of hope disappeared the instant he heard the low rumble. David's blood turned to ice as he slowly looked up from the cub. There at the edge of the clearing stood the largest lioness he had ever seen. Her golden eyes were fixed on him, and her powerful muscles were tense and ready. She was massive, easily over 300 pounds, with scars on her face that told stories of many battles. But she wasn't alone. One by one, more lions emerged from the thorn bush. First another lioness, then another and another. David counted 5 full-grown lionesses, each one bigger and more dangerous than most people ever see in their entire lives. Their eyes never left him, and their expressions were impossible to read. They moved with the fluid grace of perfect predators, their massive paws making no sound on the dusty ground. David's heart pounded so hard he thought it might explode. He was surrounded by one of Africa's most deadly predators, holding what was probably their missing cub, with nowhere to run and no way to escape. His jeep was only 10 meters away, but it might as well have been 10 miles. Even if he could reach it, there was no way he could start the engine and drive away before the lions reached him. David had read about lion attacks in his research. He knew that a single lioness could run 40 miles per hour and could kill a full-grown buffalo with one bite. 5 lionesses working together could take down almost any animal in Africa. And here he was, alone and defenseless, holding their cub. Then the circle began to move closer. The lionesses began walking toward David, their massive paws silent on the dusty ground. David could see every detail of their powerful bodies, the way their shoulder muscles rippled with each step, the sharp canine teeth visible when they breathed, the intense focus in their golden eyes. He knew that if they decided to attack, he would have no chance. But something strange was happening. They weren't showing the typical signs of aggression that David had studied. Their ears weren't flattened back against their heads, their tails weren't lashing in anger, and most importantly, they weren't making any threatening sounds. Instead, they seemed almost curious. The largest lioness, who David assumed was the pride's leader, came within 5 meters and stopped. She was even more impressive up close. Her golden coat was perfect. Her mane area showed she was an older female with years of experience, and her eyes held an intelligence that was almost human. She looked at David, then at the cub in his arms, then back at David. The little cub, sensing the presence of its family, began making excited chirping sounds. Its tiny tail wagged, and it reached out with its small paws toward the lionesses. David could feel the cub's excitement through its trembling body. That's when David noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. On the lioness's left front paw was a distinctive scar, 3 parallel lines that looked like they came from a trap or snare. David remembered reading about rescue operations where wildlife teams had freed lions from illegal snares, leaving exactly those kinds of marks. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. This wasn't just any pride. This was a pride that had been helped by humans before. They knew that not all humans were dangerous. The lead lioness had been rescued, probably as a younger animal, and she remembered that humans could be helpers, not just threats. David's fear began to mix with wonder as he realized what was happening. These lions weren't here to attack him. They were here to reclaim their cub, but they recognized him as someone who had helped, not harmed. The lead lioness took another step forward, and David held his breath. She was now close enough that he could see the individual whiskers on her face and smell her wild, earthy scent. It was a smell like no other, the smell of freedom, of wild places, of Africa itself. The cub in David's arms reached out with its tiny paw toward its mother. What happened next would stay with David for the rest of his life. The massive lioness, this queen of the African wilderness, gently lowered her huge head and began licking her cub. Her tongue was so large that each lick covered the cub's entire body, but she was incredibly gentle. The cub purred with happiness, a sound David had never heard from such a young lion. It was like a tiny motor, full of joy and contentment. Then, the lioness did something that brought tears to David's eyes. She looked directly at him, and for a moment human and lion stared into each other's souls. Then she made a soft chuffing sound, the kind of noise lions make to show friendship and gratitude. She was thanking him. David felt tears streaming down his face as he realized the magnitude of what was happening. This incredible wild animal was expressing gratitude to him in her own language. It was a moment of pure communication between two completely different species, united by their care for one small life. The other lionesses began to relax, some lying down in the grass, others grooming each other. The tension that had filled the air just minutes before was completely gone. David realized that he wasn't in danger anymore. He was being accepted as a temporary member of the pride. One of the younger lionesses approached David's side, sniffing him curiously. Her nose was wet and cold against his arm, and her whiskers tickled his skin. Another lioness came up behind him, and David found himself surrounded by massive predators who were treating him like a trusted friend. For the next hour, as the sun disappeared completely and the African stars came out in all their glory, David sat in the middle of a lion pride. The cub nursed from its mother, growing stronger by the minute. David could hear the tiny, satisfied sounds it made as it drank, and he watched as its little belly filled with life-giving milk. The lionesses took turns investigating David, sniffing his clothes, his camera equipment, even his hair. Their massive heads came so close he could feel their warm breath on his face. One lioness was particularly interested in his camera, pushing it gently with her nose and making soft questioning sounds. The youngest lioness, who appeared to be barely older than a teenager in lion years, laid down next to David. Her body heat warmed him as the night air grew cool, and her presence was both thrilling and comforting. David could feel the rumble of her breathing, and when she occasionally made soft chuffing sounds, he felt like she was trying to talk to him. David couldn't believe what was happening. He was experiencing something that maybe only a handful of humans in history had ever experienced, being truly accepted by wild lions. There were no barriers, no fear, just a moment of perfect understanding between different species sharing the same world. As the night deepened, David began to notice more details about each lioness. The leader had small scars around her eyes, probably from defending her pride. One of the middle-aged lionesses was missing the tip of her tail, perhaps from an old encounter with a crocodile. The youngest had perfect golden fur without a single mark, showing her inexperience in the harsh world of the wild. But David knew this magical moment couldn't last forever. As beautiful as this was, these were still wild animals with their own lives to live. They needed to hunt, to patrol their territory, to teach their young the skills they would need to survive. And David had his own world to return to, his own responsibilities and dreams to pursue. As if sensing his thoughts, the lead lioness stood up and picked up her cub gently in her mouth. The cub looked tiny and helpless in her massive jaws, but David knew it was safer there than anywhere else in the world. She looked at David one more time, and David could swear he saw gratitude in those amber eyes. Gratitude that would connect them across the species barrier for the rest of their lives. Then she chuffed softly one more time, a goodbye that David felt in his soul. It was a sound that said, "Thank you, goodbye, and you will always be remembered all at once." One by one, the lionesses stood up and began to move away. The young female who had been lying beside David brushed against him one last time, her fur soft against his arm. Another lioness touched his shoulder gently with her massive paw, a gesture so human-like it took David's breath away. Within minutes, they had all disappeared back into the African night, taking their rescued cub with them. David sat alone in the clearing, his heart full of emotions he couldn't even name. He had just witnessed something miraculous, something that reminded him why he had fallen in love with Africa and its incredible wildlife in the first place. The stars above seemed brighter than ever, and the sounds of the night, the distant call of hyenas, the rustle of small animals in the grass, the whisper of wind through the acacia trees, felt like a symphony celebrating the incredible encounter that had just taken place. David drove back to his camp in a daze, his mind trying to process what had happened. He had photos and video footage, but he knew that no camera could capture the emotional depth of what he had experienced. The feeling of being accepted by wild lions, the gratitude in the mother's eyes, the gentle way they had treated him. These were things that lived in the heart, not on film. The next morning, David's colleagues at the research station barely believed his story. Lions don't behave that way, they said. It's too dangerous, too unlikely, too much like a fairy tale. But David had the proof, and more importantly, he had the memory burned into his soul. Over the following weeks, David found himself changed by the experience. His research took on new meaning as he began to study the emotional lives of wild animals, the complex social structures that allowed for moments of interspecies connection. He started a blog about his experiences, sharing stories of the incredible intelligence and emotional depth he witnessed in African wildlife. 3 months later, David was tracking the same pride for his research when he saw something that made him smile. The little cub he had helped was now strong and healthy, playing with its siblings and learning to hunt. It had grown into a beautiful young lion with bright eyes and perfect golden fur. When the cub saw David's Jeep, it looked directly at him, and David could swear it remembered their special night together. The cub even took a few steps toward the vehicle before its mother called it back with a gentle chuff. The lead lioness also looked at David, and he saw recognition in her eyes, a silent acknowledgement of their shared experience. David learned that sometimes the most important scientific discoveries aren't written in research papers, they're written in the heart. He learned that kindness toward wildlife creates connections that go beyond species, and that sometimes taking a risk to help another living creature can lead to the most beautiful experiences life has to offer. The experience changed David's entire approach to conservation. He began working with local communities to create wildlife corridors, safe spaces where animals could live and raise their young without fear of human interference. He helped establish anti-poaching programs and worked with former poachers to become wildlife guides and protectors. 6 months after that magical night, David received news that filled his heart with joy. The pride he had encountered had successfully raised not just the cub he had helped, but several others. They had established a territory in a protected area and were thriving. The lead lioness had become a grandmother, and her wisdom and experience were being passed down to a new generation. David often returned to the clearing where he had experienced that moment of pure connection. Sometimes he would sit there in the evening, watching the sunset and remembering the feeling of being surrounded by lions who had chosen to trust him rather than fear him. It became his special place, a reminder that miracles can happen when we choose compassion over fear. The pride continued to thrive, and David continued his work, always remembering the night when he held a crying lion cub and discovered that courage and compassion can create miracles even in the wildest places on earth. That experience taught him that we share this planet with incredible creatures who deserve our respect and protection. Every animal has a story, every life has value, and sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to be part of something truly magical. David's story spread around the world, inspiring others to see wildlife not as dangerous predators to be feared, but as intelligent, emotional beings deserving of our care and protection. Years later, David would tell this story to students, to conservation groups, to anyone who would listen. He would explain that the most important lesson he learned that night wasn't about lion behavior or wildlife biology. It was about the power of kindness to bridge any gap, even between species that evolution had designed to fear each other. Thank you for staying with us through this incredible journey of connection between human and wildlife. Stories like David's remind us that our world is full of wonder and that kindness toward all living creatures can create moments of pure magic that last a lifetime. These are the experiences that make us truly human and that remind us why every life on this planet is precious and worth protecting.